Hey everyone, welcome to this week's reading of Rune Marks. Obviously, me and pdmac are here, so we're reading 17 and 18 tonight, and we have one more video to wrap up book 2. So that'll be next week's video, but we'll just go ahead and jump into it. Chapter 17, Gwen. Gwen stood before a crescent-shaped stone table where 7 people were seated and stared at her. Marjorie sat in the center with 3 men to her right and 3 women to her left. When Marjorie had told her that the council wanted to see her, she had no idea how intimidating it would be. Each of the members were middle-aged, with Marjorie clearly being the eldest. They all matched her, wearing the same silver-trimmed blue robes. Gwen felt naked under their eyes, like they could see into her mind and read her thoughts. It was foolish of her to feel that way, she knew, but she felt so vulnerable in their presence. Quinley Rituoth, Marjorie said, "Welcome to the Council of Librarians. As you know, we are all wizards. Like all prestiges, we seek knowledge and power. The Great Library is a vast source for all those who would seek to learn and grow, regardless of their pursuits and race." The other members of the table nodded and murmured their agreement. Yet there is an encroaching darkness coming. King Torian thinks himself an emperor and is working towards invading every kingdom around him, including Steepcross. The rumors whispered are many, but we know for certain that Grimmar, the Magebreaker, is behind it all. He has corrupted Eisenthal, and we also believe he has ensorcered Torian into killing his brother, the rightful king. "I thought Grimmar hated all who practice magic," Gwen asked. She thought back to the man who'd entered the chamber of the altar. He was an agent of Grimmar and didn't look at all like a prestige. "So he says," Marjorie replied. "It is all a ruse. He has gained the allegiance of many prestiges who want to control magic. We cannot allow that to happen. This council has long held a position of neutrality in the world, but it cannot be so anymore." The members at the table looked at Marjorie in surprise. The woman had obviously not shared that information before this meeting. Gwen was hoping these wizards would pledge their cause to the rebellion and join the fight against Torian. If what Marjorie said about Grimmar was true, they would need all the magical help they could muster. "I see that you have 2 runes. Do you want more?" Yes, Gwen didn't even have to consider the question. Those of us before you have mastered something no other wizard has. What I'm about to share with you cannot be repeated outside of this chamber. Do I have your word?" "I won't say anything." "Swear it," Marjorie said. "I swear." "Good. You know that only mages can bestow runes to other mages, yes?" Gwen nodded slowly. "Did you also know that mages can become so powerful that they ascend in power and become a wizard?" "No, I did not. I'm still new to all of this." "I can promise you that even the most seasoned prestiges do not know this. It is something this council has discovered through many years of research. Once, we were all mages." "What does that mean exactly?" Gwen scrunched her brows in confusion. "We are wizards, but we can bestow runes," Marjorie said plainly. Gwen's face lit up in understanding. "You know that the process of receiving a rune can be painful, so I will not caution you with fluffed words. These runes are powerful, most of them meant to be wielded as weapons in battle. As Simon can attest, this power comes with a burden." Simon was the man next to her. He stood and pulled his robes open, revealing a crisscross of black lines across his chest. They pulsed visibly like unholy veins, the darkness standing in stark contrast to his pale skin. "What is that?" Gwen asked. "It is the residue of dark magic," Simon replied, closing his robes. "Few are brave enough to truly delve into its practice, and fewer still are strong enough to survive using it." "You can choose which runes you want to take," Marjorie said. "I only want you to see the consequences that might arise." When Gwen had first envisioned being covered in runes, she had found the idea appalling, fearing that she would be ugly. Then she met Emil and decided that while she didn't want as many runes on her own body, they were not a blight upon her flesh as she thought. Gwen looked down at the runes on her hands. Tintreach and Soul, Lightning and Life. Gwen knew she would need all the power she could get. If her skin looked like Simon's in the end, then she hoped she would one day find someone who would love her despite the flaws to her skin, if she lived that long. "I will accept them all," she said. "Very well. Choose who your first rune will." A knock on the chamber door cut off the rest of her words. One of the women rose from her chair and hurried to the door. She opened it a few inches and shared a whispered conversation with one of the librarians. then returned to the table, carrying a letter, and passed it down to Marjorie. Gwen watched her open it and waited anxiously to continue with the runes. It seems a meeting has been called, Marjorie said. The rebellion is requesting an emissary from the Great Library. Let us send one then, Simon said. As you said, we must cease being a neutral party. Does anyone object? Marjorie asked. None of the other members said anything. Once we complete our business with Quinley, then we shall decide on who to send. Where is the meeting to be held? Gwen asked, wishing that Marjorie would quit using that ridiculous name. Haddon's, she replied. It's on the border of Eisenthal and Clagmoran. When? Gwen figured that would be the best place to report Emil's crime, but she would need to get there in time. It's in 2 days. Now, for the matter of your runes, please choose who you would like to receive a rune from first. Perhaps it would be best to start from one end of the table. Gwen motioned toward the women and swept her arm across and worked down. A good suggestion, Marjorie said. Sophia, if you would. Sophia, the woman at the very end of the left side of the table, stood and came around to join Gwen. She was slightly taller than her, with shoulder-length brown hair that was tied in a ponytail. Sophia stretched out her hand, directing it toward Gwen's forehead, and closed her eyes. Gwen closed hers as well and focused on the Bunus. The magic flowing around Sophia and the others glowed brightly, except for Simon. An inky cloud surrounded him, pulsing and flickering with flashes of dark purple. It reminded Gwen of a storm cloud, only more sinister. The rune Sophia offered hovered at the edge of Gwen's mind. It was wholesome and pure and felt similar to the Sal rune. Legis, Gwen said, speaking the rune's name. An arc of white energy penetrated Gwen's body, weaving through the strands of her being and knitting it into herself. Gwen gasped as the pain flooded her, but just as quickly as it had come, it was gone. Legis is the rune of healing. Sophia's voice broke the silence, and Gwen opened her eyes. The familiar pain of a new rune throbbed in her right hand, and she lifted her arm to view it. Her flesh was pink and raised, and just above the soul rune was her newest addition. It was a circle, surrounded by a square, surrounded by a triangle. If anyone is injured, you can use the legates to heal them. Thank you, Gwen said, lowering her arm. Sophia returned to the table, and the next woman came to take her place at Gwen's side. This woman was shorter than Gwen by a foot, but her red hair, green eyes, and fiery expression spoke volumes about her fierceness. I am Tala, she said. Lift your hand and open your palm. Gwen did as Tala asked, but the woman shook her head. No, do not show me your palm. Open it. I don't understand, Gwen said. Tala's eyes twinkled mischievously, and she drew a dagger from within her robes and handed it to Gwen. Realization dawned on Gwen, and she hesitantly accepted the blade. She glanced at Marjorie, concerned something was amiss, but the elderly woman nodded, a comforting smile tugging at her lips. Gwen pressed the tip of the blade to her palm. She swallowed her fear and pressed down slightly. The blade was sharp and cut easily into her flesh. That will do, Tala said. She took the dagger back and wiped the blood on Gwen's shirt, then cut her own palm with the blade. Tala held her hand over Gwen's to align their cuts, then whispered something under her breath. Gwen's palm tingled lightly at first, then it grew in intensity until her skin grew uncomfortably warm. Speak the name, Tala said, though her eyes were still closed. Gwen felt for the Bunus rune and connected her mind to it. She was startled to see roaring flames spinning around Tala's hand, but she quickly understood what the rune's power was. Tyne, Gwen said its name. The flames from Tala's hand coursed into her, searing through the cut in her palm. Gwen's entire body grew hot, and she could feel droplets of sweat slide down her face. With a whooshing sound, the flames died, and her body's temperature returned to normal. Fire, Gwen rasped, her throat parched. Aye, fire. It's as wild and untamed as anything you'll ever come across. Gwen had only taken 2 runes, but her legs were starting to tremor, and she was feeling lightheaded. She felt the fire rune on her left side, just under her armpit. The sensitive skin ached with pain. Do you need to rest? Marjorie asked. You don't look so good. I think I can do another, Gwen said, stubbornly trying to force her legs to quit shaking. Marjorie looked to the next woman. Valoria? Valoria bowed her head to Marjorie. She didn't leave the table, but instead stared intently at Gwen. She said nothing and hardly moved. Gwen grew troubled under her gaze, but she matched Valoria's stare and tried not to blink. Something at the edge of her vision floated toward her, but when Gwen tried to focus on it, it faded from view. Focus, Valoria said. Focus on the Bunus. Gwen knew that the Bunus was the key to unlocking the power of the runes, but each time she channeled into it, she felt herself grow weaker. She drew a deep breath and closed her eyes. The Bunus was there in her mind, and she mentally reached for it. The magic funneled in and out of her, igniting her runes but stealing her strength. One more, and I can rest for a moment, she told herself. The floating thing she saw before was a rune. Now that she was connected to the Bunus, she saw it clearly. It came toward her, guided by an unseen force, and landed on her chest. Ladrich, Gwen said. The rune rested where her heart was, and after she spoke its name, it fused to her skin. The power of the rune took the rest of her strength, but it also gave her some in exchange. The vigor it offered was slightly different than what it took, but it was a reciprocal action, and Gwen felt the tremor in her legs fade. This rune feels weird, Gwen said. Weird, but she struggled for the right word, clenching her hand into a fist. Strong? Valoria asked. Yes, Gwen replied excitedly. The rune grants might. When you tap into it, you'll find yourself capable of feats you never imagined. Gwen channeled the rune and spoke its name. Her muscles flooded with renewed energy. The weakness she felt before was completely gone. I can do another rune, she said confidently. Are you sure? Marjorie asked. It would not be wise to push herself too hard. I'm fine, Gwen replied. I feel like I could do this all day. Marjorie frowned at her, but she acquiesced. The woman left her spot at the table and came to kneel in front of Gwen. This rune will leave 2 marks, she said, one on each of your legs. It will require twice the energy, so you must be mindful when you use it. I understand. Once again, Gwen closed her eyes and went through the process of linking her mind to the Bunus. A ghostly falcon took shape and circled the room. It dived down, splitting into 2, and each bird struck her outer thighs. Gwen's knees buckled and she dropped, cracking her kneecaps roughly against the stone floor. She could feel the runes searing her skin, but the flow of magic wasn't opening up. Gwen struggled against the burning pain, trying to focus on the name of the rune. It eluded her for a brief moment, but it was long enough that she started to panic. Luas, she finally cried out. Her thoughts blurred and darkness claimed her. When Gwen opened her eyes, her face was touching the cold floor. She forced herself onto her knees and then heaved herself up to her feet. Marjorie stood nearby, a look of concern on her face. I warned you about pushing yourself, she said. I know, Gwen replied, rubbing the side of her face. It just took me by surprise. I'm fine, I promise. I think we should take a break. Sophia, can you get Quinley something to drink? Gwen was secretly glad that Marjorie called for a break. She didn't want to appear weak or unworthy of the runes, and it made her feel better that she wasn't the one temporarily giving in. She accepted a wooden cup from Sophia and drank its contents, expecting water and getting a taste of wine instead. Gwen coughed and cleared her throat, then drank the rest of it and wiped her chin on her sleeve. Please call me Gwen. It's the name I've known all my life. As long as you are in my domain, you will suffer my will. Quinley is your true name, and it is the one I will use. Gwen rolled her eyes when Marjorie wasn't looking. She gently rubbed at the fire rune on her side. Of all the ones she'd received so far, it was the most painful. Is the girl ready? Simon asked. I have many things that require my attention. Patience is a virtue, Marjorie said to him. And it's one I lack, Simon replied, scowling. Marjorie looked at Gwen. Do you need more time to rest? We can continue later if needed. Gwen shook her head. As much as she wanted to rest, she knew that time was running short if she was going to get Emil to Hadence in time for the meeting. Don't be a fool, Marjorie lowered her voice. Simon's rune can kill you if you aren't careful. I can do this, Gwen said, casting a glance at Simon. He drummed his fingers on the stone table impatiently. Very well. I warned you. If you die, my hands are clean. Marjorie returned to the table. My lord Simon, Gwen said, raising her voice. I'm ready. Call me librarian, Simon replied, rising from the table. Gwen thought him the most intimidating. His head was shaved, and his scalp glistened with a thin layer of sweat. As he drew near, Gwen saw there were black lines around his blue irises. They resembled the ones on his chest, and Gwen found them alluring in their own way. Power can be born from fear, Simon said, then grabbed Gwen by her throat. She tried to break away from his grasp, but he was stronger than her. He clenched his fingers tighter, constricting her flow of air, and she began to panic. Gwen clawed at his hands, raking his flesh with her nails. Simon was unfazed. He backed her against the wall and she looked to the other members for help. They sat quietly watching. Gwen didn't understand. He was trying to kill her, and they were doing nothing. It was a trap. Gwen's thoughts became a confusing swirl. It was because she was Cameron's daughter. Someone else had found out about her identity and threatened their power if they didn't do something about her. Or was Emil behind this? Did she know about the vial? Use your runes. It was Marjorie's voice in her head. Simon's magic is dark. It requires a darker means of transfer. Trying to kill someone was a way of sharing a rune? Gwen wasn't so sure she wanted that type of magic now, but it was too late to change her mind. She summoned the power of the strength rune and choked out its name, Leidrich. The magic flowed through her body, and she grabbed a hold of Simon's wrist. She squeezed hard and felt something crunch. Still, Simon didn't let go, but his grip weakened enough for Gwen to force his hand off her throat. She gasped in a breath and balled her hand into a fist, striking Simon directly in the chest. He staggered back, and his robes fell open, revealing the dark lines on his chest. One of the lines had been damaged by her punch, and the inky darkness dripped down his skin. It coalesced at his navel and then sprang into the air, splattering across her forehead. Gwen screamed, though it was more in surprise than pain. The liquid dripped down into her eyes, blinding her. She tried to rub it away, to no avail. Gwen saw the rune in the darkness. It was twisted and jagged and looked nothing like the others. The rune reminded her of a thorn bush. There was nothing beautiful about it. It was nothing but pain and anger and death. Yet she spoke its name anyway. Drain Sallow. Her vision slowly returned, but it wasn't the same as before. There was a murkiness to everything, as if she were looking at the world through a dark lens. No more, Gwen begged. No more runes.
Chapter 18, Connell. The dragon? Connell snorted a laugh. You hiding something I should know about? Lorcan grinned in response. I know. Still, I do find it odd that they were so intent to come into my camp. I assume you've interrogated them beyond the fact that they're dragon hunters. We've done a quick assessment, and other than them saying they're dragon hunters, we can't get much out of them. They're strange. Lorcan pointed across the field, dotted with small individual wedge tents to 4 individuals, their hands tied behind them, sitting on the ground around a fire pit, whose embers had long since cooled. 2 guards kept careful watch over them. In what way? It's hard to describe, my lord. I thought it best for you to see for yourself. As Colonel Lorcan approached, the 4 captives jerked their heads around to gape up at them. 3 of the captives were women, young, attractive women, like the woman Connell saw during his visit to Crag. They all had the wild look of a cornered hare, yet their eyes had the glazy haze of drug-induced stupor. Connell pointed to a woman about his age, strawberry blonde hair, folding over a smooth face with blue eyes and a pert nose. Except for the almost rabid look in her eyes, she was very pretty. Stand that one up, he commanded. She yelped as one guard yanked her to standing. Connell walked behind her to gaze down at her hands. Reaching down, he gently twisted her bound hand to reveal the tattoo of the dragon's head with a lance through it. With a frustrated sigh, he turned to Lorcan. You'll get nothing from them. They are what they are. Why they're here is odd. In truth, Connell knew it had something to do with Brioc, and he wondered if Brioc's rune was glowing. Why do they all have that strange look? Lorcan asked. Connell ticked his head at him to come over. See that? He pointed to the tattoo. They've all been rune marked. What does that mean? It means that someone believes that dragons are still around. This person is also a rune master. He or she put these brands in these dragon hunters. What it does is bind them to the rune master. No, it's not what you think, he said when he saw fear in Lorcan's eyes. These people wanted to do this, but it was all based upon a lie. They were promised untold riches for finding and killing a dragon. They were told stories of unimagined wealth, living the idle life of never having to work again, of having servants and slaves at your beck and call. But look at them, Lorcan said. They look like they've been drugged. How can they expect to find and kill a dragon in that condition, providing a dragon even exists? They believe it does, and the rune master behind them also believes it. They will persist until they either find a dragon and kill it, or die in the process. The question is, what do we do with them? We can't allow them to hinder or compromise our operation. The woman's stupor abruptly vanished, and she quivered with excitement. Bursts of murmuring erupted from the 3 on the ground. Connell looked up to see Brioc approaching, his face tight. The woman stared at him with glee. Dragon. Lorcan cocked an eyebrow and exchanged a look with Connell. They're crazy. I know, Connell readily agreed, noting the low glow of the rune on Brioc's arm. What do we have here? Brioc asked, doing his best to appear ignorant. Dragon hunters, Lorcan replied. And apparently they think you're a dragon. Briac frowned at Lorcan, then splayed his arms and slowly bent his head to look at his own body, his head twisting side to side. In a deliberate gesture, he looked behind him. I don't have a tail or wings. Does that mean I can't fly? How disappointing. Can you breathe fire? Connell asked with exaggerated hope. Briac loudly exhaled and shook his head. No, just morning breath, which some have accused as smelling like his breath, which never made any sense to me because it would imply they actually smell a dragon's breath. He fluttered a hand in front of his mouth. Lorcan smirked. Dragon, the woman repeated, taking a step towards Briac and struggling to free her hands. The other three jerked and twisted, trying to stand, only to be held down by the guards, whose threats did not stop their struggling. The sole focus of the dragon hunters was on Briac. Connell realized that as long as Briac stayed with them, the dragon hunters would be a problem, a big problem. This is all rather strange, Lorcan observed, staring at Briac. They didn't show up until you showed up. It's happened before, Connell explained. It has? On the way to Denhelm, we had 4 of them come out of the woods in hot pursuit of Briac. Lorcan cast a suspicious eye on Briac. Why? I am a druid, remember? Briac parried. You'd be surprised at the number of lunatics I get chasing me after me once they find out I'm a druid. Everything from wanting their fortunes whole to making it rain, while denying rain to their neighbor next that they don't like. But why dragon hunters and why now? Briac fixed him with a sharp stare. Torian seeks to rule over all the kingdoms and will leave nothing to chance. It is obvious he believes dragons exist and sent out these poor fools to find them. The problem is that anyone or anything magical attracts them, like bees to a pollinating flower. I'm only a druid. Can you imagine what it must be like to be a mage or a wizard and have to fend these creatures off? You're a druid, Lorcan said. Can't you do something to fix it? Were it that easy, Briac replied, rolling his eyes. You see that tattoo? It's a rune mark. If you examine it closely, you'll see the runes. But more importantly, once you're rune marked, you can never go back. He slid a meaningful glance at Connell. In their case, they are forever marked as dragon hunters. Well, what should we do with them? Do you want them following you and continuing to advertise where you are? Lorcan turned to Connell. We can't have them following us, my lord. Torian has already sent warring parties across the border to Tirmanok. Caldir does nothing to stop him. Were it not for Commander Sorcha, Torian would be by the sea by now. Who is Sorcha? She's a former regimental commander. She spoke out against Caldir's submission to Torian and barely escaped with her life. However, she was much loved, and before Caldir realized it, a third of his army had deserted her operations to our north in Brody's domain. Caldir allows this? Briac said with an eyebrow raised. Caldir sent urgent demands for troops, Lorcan answered, frowning at the dragon hunters who were staring at Briac with uncontained fascination. We interrupted 2 messages meant for Farrell. And Farrell doesn't know all this is going on? Connell knitted his brow, wondering if he had missed the signals while he was in Hemlin. I can't say, my lord, Lorcan replied. What I can say is that I wouldn't trust him. Connell swiveled his head to stare at Briac. He knows who I am. It's just a matter of time before he directs his attention here. We assumed that, my lord, Lorcan interrupted. That's why we intercepted you on the way to Caldir. Where's Drustin? Briac interjected. He's still with Voldar, and the dwarf force is near the 4 corners where the kingdoms meet. That is where we were headed. Then you have a plan in place? Connell asked, hoping someone smarter than he had thought this all out. Not completely, my lord, he admitted. We head down to connect with King Rorcan. We're praying that the forces to the east have likewise mobilized. What do we know about them? Not much, my lord. Drustin probably knows more. What about Sorcha? We don't have time to chase her down, Briac asserted. We know we can depend on the forces she has. It's merely a question of coordinating the attack. We need to get south to Clag Morgan. and then find out if the commander is with us. We're wasting time. What do we do with them? Lorcan ticked his head at the dragon hunters. Kill them, Breck flatly stated. Lorcan's jaw tightened. We're not murderers. Then give you a better solution, Breck retorted. They're here because of you, Lorcan countered. And if Jerusalem were here, we'd have the same problem, Connell pointed out. Or any other person with magical powers, Breck added, then narrowed his gaze at Lorcan. Will you have magic with you when you attack Torian? Because if you don't, even the gods can't help you. We're not murderers, Lorcan stubbornly insisted. Is it because you disarmed them? Breck challenged. Then give them back their weapons, and I will fight them. I will do what you were unwilling to do. What's all the fuss? Targeth called out, walking over where Connell, Breck, and Lorcan seemed to be in an argument. Gallagher strolled beside him, casually taking in the encampment. They captured 4 dragon hunters trying to infiltrate their lines, Connell answered, and we're deciding what to do with them. What is to decide? Gallagher calmly answered. They're rune-bound to the Mage Master who serves Torian. If you believe Torian to be good, then release them. If Torian is evil, then those who willingly serve him are likewise evil. When you defeat Torian, will you set him free? Lorcan immediately understood, but the sour expression on his face said he still didn't like it. Is it your wish, my lord? Trying to absolve yourself? Breck tartly said. Everyone just stop, Connell commanded. Arguing like this gets us nowhere. I'll do it. And started to unsheath his sword when a voice stopped him. I'll take care of it, boss, Maldwick boldly said, striding up. Cyril and 2 others walking with him. Connell slid his sword back to his sheath, both pleased and impressed with the man. Thank you, Commander. You all go on about your affairs, Maldwick said, while we take care of business at hand. Immediate feeling like his authority had been usurped, Lorcan held a hand up, exhaling a long, suffering sigh. Thank you, Commander, but this is my responsibility. I'm the one who allowed them into my camp. I will deal with it. Maldwick looked at Connell. Boss? No, he's right. It is his responsibility. Without waiting for a comment, he headed back to his tent where Beato waited for him. Maldwick hustled to catch up to him and matching strides as walked. Got some info for you, boss. Overheard Lorcan's scouts reporting a large force crossing the border into Tirmonic and heading south. Assuming Lorcan didn't know yet, Connell jerked to a halt and spun around to see the 4 captives kneeling and lined up in a row. Lorcan and 3 others standing behind them. Breck stood 2 paces away in front of the captives, Torgrith and Gallagher behind him. With their attention devoted to Breck, the captives didn't see or notice when Lorcan gave the command. In one uniform motion, he and the others raised their swords and in a fearful arc, sliced through the necks, separating heads from quivering bodies. The deed done, Lorcan stood, surveying the scene, reconciling distaste with necessity. 2 women soldiers approached him. Those are the scouts, Maldwick revealed. While Connell couldn't hear what was said, he saw Lorcan straighten, question the 2 scouts, and make a beeline towards him. My lord, enemy troops about an hour away heading south. We need to intercept them. Take charge. We'll follow your lead. Thank you, my lord. We leave in 10 minutes. 2 hours of hard riding gave Lorcan's army time to set up an ambush. His scouts estimated the enemy's strength around 500, moving in cohort units of 50, each cohort led by a junior officer. The enemy commander, a large man with a perpetual scowl, sat upon a large steed, controlling his forces from the middle. Lorcan was impressed, for the man moved his army as one with experience. Yet that mattered little, for Lorcan's army outnumbered his opponent by 6 to 1. Lorcan arranged his ambush in box pattern, with the lid open, allowing the enemy to enter the box before Lorcan closed it with the rear guard. Much to Lorcan's distress, Connell refused to stay out of harm's way, firmly informing him that he intended to fully participate, positioning himself with Maldwick's small force blocking the road. Lorcan had chosen the terrain well, for the road the enemy followed undulated along the side of a mountain in a series of curves that blocked what was in front or behind. All they had to do now was wait. Never been in a real battle, Torgrith offhandedly commented, double-bladed axe in his hand, but I do know how to handle an axe. I'm sure you will excel, my friend, Gallaudet reassured him. The elf had chosen a longbow, along with half a dozen quivers stuffed with arrows. Together, he and the dwarf stood inside the tree line beside the road, where it sharply curved as it bent back upon itself. Connell and Briac stood opposite them across the road. Maldek's small force, along with 300 of Lorcan's army, filled in behind them. Just as the lead scouts of the enemy rounded the corner, a ram's horn sounded and the shouts of battle filled the air. Connell raced forward, easily outdistancing his friends, and hurled himself past the scouts, who had fallen, pierced with arrows from Gallaudet's perfect aim. In short order, Connell came upon the main body, already the melee as battle, as Lorcan forces attacked from both sides. Trusting the power of his runes, Connell dove headlong into the fight, a crazed dervish destroying everything in his path. All too quickly, the enemy gave ground, pressed hard from the sides, but especially from the vehemence of Connell's attack, for he had cut a path through the enemy as he forged his way to the commander, who by now realized that his position was lost. In a vain attempt to rally his troops, the commander called for retreat, only to find his escape route was blocked. Accepting the fate that he and his army were lost, the commander dismounted and slapped the horse in the rear, sending him away, then turned to do battle. Surprised that he suddenly faced a man smaller than he, who had managed to carve his way here, the strewn bodies of the dead behind him. Who are you? Connell's eyes blazed, and he felt a sudden surge of overwhelming strength as he answered, I am Connell, the son of the true king of Esental. That king is dead, the commander retorted, just as you will be. The commander raised his sword to block Connell's attack, immediately feeling as though a granite anvil had crashed into him. He felt a tingling in his arm as it weakened, yet he hadn't counted on Connell's speed, for no sooner had the downward stroke smashed into him, he felt a sharp pain and a sudden warmth across his stomach. He looked down to see his stomach sliced open. He raised his head just in time to see his last vision while still alive, a vision of a man whose cold, angry eyes spoke of revenge before the world went black. Once the commander went down, the enemy's will to fight withered and died. Throwing down their swords and axes and bows, they stood in place and surrendered. His berserker's rage draining away, Connell inhaled a deep breath, surveying the bloody battlefield of broken bodies and the cries of the mortally wounded. Movement at the corner of his eye caught his attention, and he twisted his head in time to see Briac lurching into the forest, an arrow through his chest.
All righty, that wraps up this week's reading. So make sure to subscribe and keep your eyes peeled for the final chapters of book 2 next week.
Yay!
See you guys.